Welcome to Secrets of the Ancients, where the mysteries of the ancient world come to life. From forgotten Egyptian dynasties to incredible wonders carved in stone, we dig into the hidden stories of our past, one discovery at a time. Subscribe and step into a world where time speaks. In 1990, a geologist from Boston University named Robert Schoch visited Egypt to study the Great Sphinx, the largest ancient statue in the world. His goal was to examine it from a geological point of view. At first he believed the traditional theory that the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khafra. But there were still many unanswered questions. Why were there no inscriptions on the Sphinx's body to tell us its age or who built it? Why was its body so heavily eroded? And why is the head so small compared to the body, especially considering how skilled ancient Egyptian sculptors were?
By the end of my research, I came to a surprising conclusion. The Sphinx is much older than most people think. I estimated that it could date back to around 10,000 BCE.
The Sphinx, with the body of a lion and the head of a human, is carved from a single piece of limestone. It's about 73 meters long and 20 meters high, roughly the height of a 6-story building. The same bedrock from the Giza plateau was used to sculpt the Sphinx, and huge blocks removed during carving were used to build the temples in front of it. Despite extensive studies, the Sphinx remains a mystery. We still have no solid evidence of who carved it, when or why. Let's go back to where the story takes a turn. Seismic studies were carried out around the Sphinx to understand the structure of the rock beneath it. Just like sonar systems on ships measure the depth of the seafloor to help navigate safely, 4 sensors were placed around the Sphinx's body. One team member would strike a metal plate to generate sound waves. These waves travelled through the ground and bounced back to the surface, where their speed was measured. By analysing how fast the sound waves travelled, researchers could determine the shape and density of the rock under the Sphinx. If the rock was solid, the sound would travel faster. If it was weathered or deteriorated, the sound would move slower.
After analyzing the data, we found that the depth of the weathered rock layer beneath the Sphinx was significant, up to 3 meters in some spots. There was a weathered upper layer and a more solid layer below it. This kind of erosion couldn't have happened from just 10 or 20 years of rain. No, it would take hundreds or even thousands of years of heavy rainfall. This was a key point in proving that not only the body of the Sphinx and the surrounding walls had eroded, but even the bedrock beneath it had worn down over a long, rainy period. That kind of erosion simply can't happen in a desert climate. It requires a wet, rainy one.
In front of the Sphinx, there are 2 temples, the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple. The stones used to build these temples came from the same rock the Sphinx was carved from. When the Sphinx was being sculpted, massive blocks were removed from the surrounding bedrock and used as building material for the temples. These stones show signs of erosion from water, just like the Sphinx itself. And along the path between the 3 pyramids, you can also see erosion marks on many large exposed stones. These are just a few examples from thousands of similar blocks.
So far, we've talked about 4 pieces of evidence. The erosion on the Sphinx's body, the erosion patterns on the walls surrounding the Sphinx, the seismic studies beneath the monument, the weathering of the temple stones.
From a geological standpoint, these results suggest that the Sphinx endured long periods of heavy rain. If the real age of the Sphinx is somewhere between 7,000 and 11,000 BCE, that clearly puts it way before the dynastic period, which began around 3000 BCE. This would mean that later Egyptian dynasties likely rediscovered the Sphinx and repurposed it. First off, just because a statue of Khafra was found in the temple in front of the Sphinx doesn't mean he carved the Sphinx. Take the Karnak temple, for example. You can find chapels side by side there, each built by different kings. So, finding Khafra's statue in the Valley Temple near the Sphinx isn't strong enough evidence to prove he created it.
The second claim is that the face of the Sphinx resembles Khafra, but I wasn't convinced by this supposed similarity, and I wanted to challenge it using science. I consulted Frank Domingo, a forensic expert in facial recognition from the NYPD. Domingo traveled to Egypt and got the proper permits to study both the Great Sphinx and the statue of Khafra in the Egyptian Museum. After a thorough analysis, he concluded that the two faces were clearly different. The Sphinx has wider eyes and a broader mouth, while Khafra's mouth is thinner. The differences became even more obvious when you compare specific facial angles. The angle from the chin to the eyes in Khafra's statue is more than double that of the Sphinx, thanks to Khafra's more prominent jawline. The ancient Egyptians were masters of sculpture. They made statues that were nearly identical. Look at the statues of Akhenaten or Tutankhamun's sarcophagus and mask. Even when there were small differences, they were subtle. But in the case of the Sphinx and Khafra, the differences are major. Anyone comparing their faces in photos today can see they don't match.
Let's summarize what the well-known Egyptian archaeologist Dr. Selim Hassan said. He spent years excavating around the Sphinx and concluded that to this day we still don't have solid proof about its true age or who built it. There isn't a single inscription from that period that clears things up. Even people in the New Kingdom didn't seem to know much about the statue, and it's unlikely they had the historical insight we do now.
In the same room as Khafra's statue in the Egyptian Museum, there's a controversial stone plaque called the Inventory Stela. It claims that Khufu, Khafra's grandfather, carried out projects in the Giza area, including, get this, restoring and decorating the Sphinx. That would mean the Sphinx existed before Khufu ruled Egypt. Now, if we think about how old the Sphinx really is, if it needed restoration during Khufu's time, then it must have been built long before him.
According to German archaeologist Dr. Rainer Stadelmann, if Khufu restored the Sphinx, he must have seen it, which means it predates his reign. Critics argue the Inventory Stela was written during the 26th dynasty, about 2,000 years after Khufu's time. But does that really discredit it? Ancient Egyptians wrote it, and they likely based it on earlier sources. Still, many scholars dismissed the inscriptions simply because they were set on connecting the Sphinx to Khafra.
Another important point, why is the Sphinx's head so small compared to its body? If you look at it from the side, the head looks oddly small and out of proportion. Other Sphinx statues in the Egyptian Museum are well proportioned and balanced. So why would the Great Sphinx be the exception? This is where Schoch and I offered a bold theory. The Sphinx's current head isn't the original one. We suggested that the original head eroded over time and was later recarved by pharaohs during the dynastic period, possibly more than once. That could explain why the head looks small in relation to the body. If you look closely, you'll notice the head is in much better condition than the heavily eroded body. Logically, the head should be more worn down than the body, or at least equally weathered, because it's more exposed to wind and rain. But it's better preserved. This suggests the head was recarved into the likeness of someone specific, although we don't yet know who.
There's also an ongoing debate about whether the original Sphinx had the head of a human or a lion. But one thing seems certain. The head we see today is not the original. Like many of Egypt's ancient monuments, the Sphinx still holds secrets we've yet to fully understand. Restoration and the mystery of the Sphinx's origins. The Sphinx has been restored many times throughout history. The first restorations took place in the New Kingdom and later during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. Over the past 100 years, modern efforts have also been made to repair and preserve it, and restoration work continues even today. In fact, some of the visible restoration stones on the statue don't even need to be repaired. Could the Sphinx be much older than we think? Some evidence strongly suggests that the Sphinx was restored during Egypt's 4th dynasty, but it might actually be far older than that. Dr. Selim Hassan pointed out that the Roman historian Pliny believed the Great Sphinx predated the time of the Donat, likely a mistranslation, possibly referring to a dynasty or ruling period, and dated back to the era of the Followers of Horus. Similarly, the Egyptologist Gaston Maspero wrote that the Sphinx had served as a guardian in the far north since the time of the Followers of Horus. Some researchers and historians support the idea that the Sphinx was built before Egypt's dynastic period. Was there more than one Sphinx? According to an ancient legend, a young Egyptian prince went out hunting and stopped to rest in the shade of the Sphinx's head. While sleeping, the Sphinx appeared to him in a dream and promised he would become king if he cleared away the sand that buried it. That prince eventually became Pharaoh Thutmose IV. Inspired by the vision, he cleared the sand and built a protective wall around the Sphinx to prevent it from being buried again. This story was carved into a granite slab placed between the Sphinx's paws, what we now call the Dream Stele. But here's where it gets interesting. The stele shows Thutmose IV offering sacrifices not to one Sphinx, but to two. Could this be evidence of a second Sphinx? In ancient Egypt, Sphinx statues were often made in pairs, especially in ceremonial avenues. Just look at the avenue of the Sphinxes in Luxor. Sphinxes line both sides of the path. You can also find pairs of them near Pompey's Pillar and in temples like Luxor's, where they appear symmetrically on both sides. This pattern is repeated at several archaeological sites. Search for the second Sphinx. In the 1920s, the British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie considered the possibility that a second Sphinx might exist, especially since the Dream Stele seemed to hint at it. So he stood behind the Great Sphinx, faced west, and walked in a straight line, hoping to find another one on the same axis. He crossed the Nile and passed through the town of Mardeh. When he reached the edge of the eastern desert, nothing. Despite his efforts, there was no trace of a second Sphinx. Egyptologist Bassam el-Shamar also explored this idea. Through contacts at NASA, he suggested a possible location for the second Sphinx. NASA sent him satellite images of the area, which showed a carved stone formation, possibly man-made, though it could also be natural. While nothing was confirmed, El-Shamar believed a second Sphinx could theoretically exist at that site. He even published a book called The Second Sphinx, documenting NASA's images and other evidence, but due to a lack of excavation permits, the project was abandoned. Dr. Zahi Hawass, on the other hand, responded by saying that he had already excavated that area and found nothing. As a result, the theory remains unproven to this day. Robert Bauval, whose theories we discussed earlier, also looked into the idea of a second Sphinx. He believed the pyramids were built around 10,500 BC and suspected there was a second Sphinx, even though he didn't know its exact location. One of the Sphinx's ancient names was Hor-em-Akhet, meaning Horus in the horizon. So Bauval asked himself, where exactly is Horus in the horizon?
Using an astronomical simulation program, he set the sky to the year 10,500 BC and studied the alignments from the Sphinx's perspective. What he saw blew his mind. He immediately called his friend Graham Hancock and said, "You won't believe what I found." Bauval had discovered that around 10,500 BC, the constellation Leo, the lion, rose directly in front of the Sphinx, perfectly matching its lion-shaped body. This was a powerful symbolic connection that suggested the Sphinx and pyramids were built in the age of Leo.
Back then, the Orion's belt stars aligned with the three Giza pyramids, while the Milky Way ran parallel to the Nile River in the south. At the same time, Leo rose directly in front of the Sphinx in the east, but fast forward to around 2500 BC, the commonly accepted date for the Sphinx, and Leo would not be visible in front of it. In fact, when the Sphinx faced east, it wasn't looking at the rising sun. According to Bauval, it was looking at its celestial reflection, a symbolic mirror in the sky.
For Bauval, this was more proof that the Giza Plateau was designed to mirror the stars as they appeared in 10,500 BC. As we discussed earlier, the Nile mirrored the Milky Way, the pyramids mirrored Orion's belt, and the Sphinx mirrored the constellation Leo. This alignment happens only once every 26,000 years, a cycle known to astronomers as the Great Year.
Why this still matters. In the future, new discoveries may emerge, things hidden in the ancient sites that we haven't found yet. That's why moving ancient monuments like temples or obelisks is such a bad idea. We don't know what hidden insights or connections we might lose in the process. The ancient Egyptians chose those locations for a reason. Relocating them risks breaking a link we don't yet understand. This is where Robert Bauval's theory overlaps with Robert Schoch's. The idea is this: the most important monuments at Giza, the pyramids and the Sphinx, likely date back to around 10,500 BC. In the early 1990s, Robert Schoch, a geologist, presented his theory about the Sphinx's true age to Egyptologists. It didn't go over well. Dr. Lehner called Schoch's team ignorant and careless, while Dr. Zahi Hawass dismissed the idea as American hallucination, but Schoch didn't back down. As a skilled geologist, he published his theory in a book called Voices of the Rocks, and later in Origins of the Sphinx, which he co-authored with Robert Bauval. In these books, they laid out their argument about the real age of the Sphinx. In my view, Bauval and Schoch made two key mistakes in their theory. They separated the pyramids and the Sphinx from the rest of ancient Egyptian history. They suggested that these structures were built by an entirely different civilization, not the ancient Egyptians we know. That's a major weak point. It's like saying a mysterious group of people showed up, built the pyramids and the Sphinx, and then vanished. But where are their temples, tombs, inscriptions? Lehner capitalized on this during debates, pointing out that there's no evidence of such a separate civilization. They kept bringing up Atlantis. Without solid evidence, they claimed that survivors from the sunken continent of Atlantis brought their advanced knowledge to Egypt and founded a new civilization. But to this day, there's no concrete proof of Atlantis existing at all. Much of the debate centers around their claim that there was a civilization living in Egypt over 10,000 years ago, before recorded history. Historians argue that no such civilization existed at that time. The alternative theorists respond, then it must have been a lost civilization. And until we know who they were, we'll just call them that, the lost civilization. The Followers of Horus and the Golden Age. According to ancient Egyptian tradition, Egypt's earliest phase was known as the Age of the Gods. Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris, was the last of these divine rulers. He handed over power to a line of powerful kings and continued to protect them. This marked the beginning of the era of the Followers of Horus, also called the Shemsu-Hor. I believe these Shemsu-Hor kings ruled during Egypt's Golden Age, the time when the pyramids and Sphinx were built. Many of Egypt's most amazing monuments, those that still leave us in awe, weren't built by the dynastic pharaohs, but by this earlier group. We don't have precise dates for their rule, partly because large sections of the Turin King List papyrus are missing. The numbers we have today are mostly estimates, but what we do know is that they ruled before the dynastic period began. According to Eusebius, who cited the ancient Egyptian priest Manetho, these rulers reigned for at least 5,000 years, two competing views of Egyptian history. Ever since Bauval and Schoch introduced their ideas in the early 90s, and John Anthony West added his theory about the age of the Sphinx, there have been two main schools of thought about ancient Egypt. The mainstream view, which is the most widely accepted and promoted.
This includes leading figures like Dr. Zahi Hawass, Dr. Mark Lehner, Dr. Rainer Stadelman, Dr. Bob Breyer, Dr. Salima Ikram, and many more. It's supported by university departments, museum curators, and most official publications. According to this version, Egyptian civilization began around 3,500 BC, and the dynastic kings were the ones who built the pyramids, temples, and obelisks, using basic tools like hammers, chisels, wooden sleds, and rollers. This school also says the civilization declined gradually due to political weakness, foreign invasions, Persian, Greek, Roman, and eventually disappeared altogether.
The alternative view, which tells a very different story. You'll find it in books labeled Alternative History. Some of the key names include Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, Christopher Dunn, Robert Schoch, Robert Bauval, and several Egyptians as well. They present astronomical, geological, and scientific evidence suggesting that a major chapter in Egyptian history is missing, one that goes back between 10,000 and 12,000 BC.
According to them, Egypt's civilization didn't just begin with the pharaohs, it inherited knowledge and technology from an earlier, advanced civilization, one that we've only just started